The champagne glass in my father's hand caught the afternoon light as he raised it high. His eyes were glistening with tears of joy while making a toast to my sister Ashley's unborn baby. He called this child his first legacy. The problem wasn't his emotion or the beautiful speech. The problem was the 7-month-old baby girl in my arms, my daughter, Grace, his actual first grandchild, a child he'd never even met because my sister spent half a year making sure we didn't exist. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. The backyard of the Long Island estate was a masterclass in artificial perfection, manicured hedges, white linen, and the sound of waves hitting the private pier. David turned toward me, his face glowing with a patronizing warmth that usually meant he was about to remind me of my place. He raised his glass one more time and asked, loud enough for the entire elite gathering to hear, Emily, when will it be your turn to finally make me a grandfather? I didn't cry, I didn't let my breath hitch. For 30 years, my role in this family had been the sensible one, the quiet scientist who swallowed her words to keep the peace. I had been a silent investor in their version of family, footing the emotional bill while getting zero returns. But as I felt Grace's tiny hand grip my thumb, the contract was officially void. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdraft for the last time. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. I shifted Grace on my hip and stepped into the light. My voice didn't shake, it was clinical, steady, and loud. It was my turn 7 months and 3 days ago, Dad. That was the moment 30 years of silence shattered. The backyard went so silent I could hear the ice melting in the punch bowl. I watched the color drain from Ashley's face. Her designer maternity dress, which cost $85,000, couldn't hide the sudden, jagged tremor in her hands. David's glass tilted, spilling expensive champagne across his leather shoes. His confusion was almost comical. What are you talking about, Emily? You're making a scene. I looked him dead in the eye. I'm stating a fact. This is Grace. She's 7 months old. You were invited to the hospital. You were invited to her homecoming. You were invited to her christening. But your favorite daughter, the one you're toasting right now, made sure those invitations ended up in the trash before you ever saw them. Ashley moved then, her silver tongue already reaching for a narrative to save her. She clutched her stomach, faking a wince, and called me dramatic. She told the crowd I was making things up for attention, that I was hysterically jealous of her pregnancy. It was a practiced performance, the kind she'd used to stay the golden child while I became the ghost. But anger wasn't loud this time, it was analytical. I saw the flash of pure panic in her eyes when she realized I wasn't backing down. She thought she could keep us erased forever. She thought I'd stay sensible, but I was done playing along. I looked at the crowd of Long Island's elite, people who had ignored me for decades, and realized they weren't shocked by what she'd done, they were shocked that I'd stopped following the script. Inside my mind, a different kind of sunrise was glowing. It was made of facts, numbers, and the beginning of a very long, no accounting. I didn't ask why she did it. I already knew. Now, I just had to show everyone else. The silence in the garden felt heavy to everyone else, but for me, it was the first time I could finally breathe. I watched the socialites of Long Island shift in their seats, waiting for me to cry or scream. They didn't understand that scientists don't melt down. We observe, we collect data, we conclude. My father stood there, champagne soaking into his expensive shoes, looking at me as if I were a stranger. In his eyes, I was still the sensible Emily, the one who didn't cause problems. He didn't. That being sensible was just a mask for 30 years of being systematically erased. I thought back to every missed milestone. When I was 12, David bought Ashley a competition-grade horse for $10,000. That same week, I asked for a few $100s to attend a state science camp. He told me to be realistic. He said the family had priorities, and my hobbies didn't make the cut. I learned then that my value was negotiable. I funded my own doctorate through sheer exhaustion, working nights in a lab while Ashley drained the family trust to pay for $85,000 wedding seasons and private jets. David would brag about how self-sufficient I was, but that was just a polished lie he told to cover up his own neglect. For 3 decades, I stayed quiet because I was trapped in a prison without bars. It is what experts call learned helplessness. When you are raised in a toxic environment where your needs are consistently ignored, you eventually stop trying to escape. You become conditioned to believe that you have no power. So you simply stop fighting. I was a survivor who had grown so used to the invisible chains that I started to believe they were part of my own body. I was the ghost in the house, the silent investor who footed the emotional bill for everyone else's happiness while getting zero returns. I still remember my mother's funeral. I was 15. David leaned over and whispered that I had to be the strong one. Ashley was allowed to collapse, to scream, to be the center of the universe's pity, but I was the one who had to make the coffee and answer the door. I was the one who had to grow up instantly. My compassion became a financial resource they overdraft for years without ever making a deposit. Looking at Ashley now, resplendent in a dress that cost more than my mortgage, I realized she hadn't just stolen my father's attention, she had stolen my child's security. While she was using that trust fund to live like a queen, I was struggling to pay for Grace's medical bills. I lived in a cramped apartment and counted every penny while my sister diverted my mail and sabotaged my career. I kept the peace because I thought it was the only way to belong, but looking at Grace, I realize I don't want to belong to a group that requires my daughter to be invisible. This isn't revenge, it is an audit. I am here to clear the ledger of 30 years of bad debt. My silence is over, the forensic reconstruction of my life begins today. Ashley didn't apologize, she didn't offer a single word of regret. Instead, she leaned into the only weapon she had ever truly mastered, the performance of a victim. She clutched her stomach, a jagged, dramatic wince twisting her face. She let out a soft, sharp gasp, making sure the entire crowd saw her stagger. Instantly, the focus shifted. The air was thick with the scent of sea salt and the metallic tang of social fear. David was at her side in 3 seconds, his hands fluttering over her $85,000 dress like she was made of fine glass. It was a masterclass in narcissistic triangulation. This is the tactic where a master manipulator controls the flow of information between two people to create conflict and ensure they remain the center of the world. For 30 years, Ashley had been the architect of David's reality. She didn't just lie, she conditioned him. She spent decades quietly narrating my life to him, painting me as the unstable, jealous daughter so that when I finally spoke the truth, it sounded like a breakdown. Instead of a revelation, this is what psychological experts call the trap of cruel normalization. It is the process where abuse is so consistent and so buried in everyday life that it becomes invisible to the people standing right in the middle of it. David wasn't just blind, he was trained. Aunt Amanda stepped forward, her voice a low, rhythmic whisper of condemnation. "Emily, look at what you're doing to her," she said, her eyes narrowing with institutionalized irritation. "She's pregnant, you're being hysterical, you're jealous?" David looked up from Ashley, and for the first time, I saw genuine disgust in his eyes. He didn't see a daughter holding his actual grandchild, he saw an inconvenient variable in his perfect family equation. "Emily, stop it," he ordered, his voice cold and final. "You've always been difficult, but this is too far, go home." In the past, those words would have been a lethal blow. They would have sent me retreating into the shadows, checking my emotional balance and finding myself in the red. But today, my internal audit was complete. I looked at Ashley, who was faking a contraction with the same precision she used to fake her interest in my mother's life insurance. She wasn't a sister, she was a liability. She was a bad investment that I was finally ready to liquidate. I didn't argue with David's command. I didn't try to explain the truth for the 1000th time. You don't negotiate with a fraudulent board of directors, you present the evidence. I turned toward the large outdoor presentation screen my sister had rented to show her ultrasound photos. It was currently glowing with a slideshow of her artificial happiness. Inside my hand, I gripped the folder that Ashley thought she had hidden. It was time to shift from personal grievances to a forensic audit. The party was over, but the accounting had just begun. I didn't move, I didn't blink. David had told me to go home, to retreat back into the shadows where I'd lived for 30 years, but he didn't realize he was no longer the chairman of my board. I didn't need his permission to stay, because I wasn't there as a daughter anymore. I was there as an auditor. I turned away from his disgusted glare and walked toward my car parked in the circular driveway. The Long Island air was cooling, but my focus was white hot. I grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat and walked back to the gala's center stage with a heavy, rhythmic stride. As a research scientist, I have spent my life understanding that data is the only language that cannot be manipulated by a silver tongue. While Ashley spent her life perfecting the art of the lie, I spent mine perfecting the art of the proof. I didn't say a word as I bypassed the caterers and connected my laptop to the massive outdoor presentation screen. The slides of Ashley's curated pregnancy bliss flickered and died. In their place, a different kind of light filled the garden, the cold, blue glow of a forensic audit. The crowd began to murmur, but I ignored them. I opened the first file. "I don't just have feelings, Dad," I said, my voice carrying over the speakers. "I have metadata." On the screen, I displayed a map of diverted digital traffic. I showed everyone the logs from my medical insurance provider. For 7 months, I had wondered why my insurance cards and birth claims never arrived. Now, 60 elite guests were looking at the digital trail. Every single piece of mail regarding Grace's birth had been intercepted and redirected to a private post office box registered to Ashley's business account. She hadn't just hidden a baby, she had committed mail fraud to ensure Grace remained a ghost in our father's ledger. I clicked to the next slide. This was the accounting of my career. I displayed the anonymous tip sent to the board of directors at my research firm, the one that claimed I was resigning to be a stay-at-home mother. I didn't just show the text, I showed the originating internet protocol address. It matched the Long Island Estate's private network, sent at a time when only Ashley was home. That $110,000 promotion didn't vanish because of my lack of commitment, it was liquidated by my sister to ensure I stayed financially tethered and easy to control. But the kill shot was the physical evidence. I pulled up a live listing from an exclusive vintage watch resale site. David, you told me months ago that you lost your grandfather's heirloom watch, the one you valued at $65,000. You said it was a sign of your aging mind. On the screen, the high-resolution photos of that exact watch appeared. I traced the seller's account back to Ashley's encrypted email address. She wasn't just safeguarding the family legacy, she was harvesting it. I looked at the crowd, then at my father. The patronizing grin was gone from his face. The data was undeniable. It was clinical, factual, and lethal. Ashley was still on the ground, but she wasn't faking a contraction anymore. She was staring at the screen where her entire house of cards was being systematically dismantled by the sister she thought was too sensible to fight back. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was the one holding the flashlight. I closed the tab for the resale site and opened the final, most devastating file in my digital ledger. This was the one I had saved for the end, the evidence that would move this from a family dispute to a felony case. I looked at David, who was currently staring at his favorite daughter with a look of growing horror. I let the silence hang for a beat, letting the weight of the previous revelations sink in, before I delivered the kill shot. I told the room that the grandchild fund Ashley had been draining wasn't family wealth that David had built. It was our late mother's life insurance policy, a $250,000 trust she had intended specifically for her first biological grandchild. Ashley didn't just hide Grace's existence because she was jealous, she did it because she needed to ensure Grace remained a ghost long enough for her to embezzle the entire amount. On the screen, I displayed the waiver of interest documents that had been filed with the trust attorney. These papers legally stripped me of my rights to the funds, claiming I had no interest in the money. I zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the page. It was my name, written in a handwriting that looked almost exactly like mine, but was just a fraction too perfect. I checked the metadata on the digital scan of that document. It had been signed and uploaded on the very day I was in the delivery room, fighting through a 30-hour labor with Grace. While I was focused on the survival of my child, Ashley was in the waiting room with my bag, helping. By handling the paperwork, she had forged my signature while I was physically incapable of holding a pen, liquidating my daughter's future to fund her own lifestyle. This was the moment the trap of cruel normalization finally snapped shut. For years, David had been the architect of this dynamic, allowing Ashley to be the golden child while I was the sensible one who had to handle the hard things. He had been trained to see my success as automatic and Ashley's failures as tragedies that required cash. But looking at the forgery on the screen, he couldn't hide behind the excuse of a family joke anymore. David didn't say a word to me, he didn't even look at the crowd. He slowly turned his back on Ashley, who was still on the ground, now sobbing a different kind of tear, the kind shed by a predator who has finally been cornered. He walked toward me with a gait that looked 20 years older than it had when he started his toast. He reached out and, for the first time in 7 months, he touched his granddaughter's hand. I didn't move, I didn't offer a hug. I reached into my bag and pulled out a physical folder, handing it to him. It wasn't an invitation this time, it was a formal notice of intent to sue for the stolen trust funds and the heirloom property. I looked at the man who had spent 30 years letting me be erased and said, "I am not your sensible Emily anymore, Dad. I am the woman who is taking back every cent you let her steal. The contract is over, the balance is due." 5 months have passed since that afternoon on the Long Island waterfront. The salt air feels different now. It no longer smells like expensive lies and decades of silence. Today, my living room is filled with a different kind of noise. It is Grace's first birthday. There is no $85,000 party or hired videographers. There are just people who actually show up. My father, David, is in the corner, carefully trying to assemble a wooden toy for his granddaughter. It has been a slow process. Rebuilding a relationship that was built on 30 years of neglect takes more than just an apology. It takes a complete restructuring. We are taking it one day at a time, and for the first time in my life, his eyes are actually on me when I speak. Ashley is gone, not just from the house, but from the narrative she tried so hard to control. The legal system is far less susceptible to narcissistic triangulation than our father was. She is currently facing multiple fraud charges for the embezzlement of my mother's life insurance trust. The Long Island elite she lived for have turned their backs on her. It turns out that a reputation built on the theft of your sister's child's future is a very bad investment. There is no amount of Botox or Designer silk that can hide the forensic reality of a felony. I didn't just take the money back, I turned it into architecture. I used the $250,000 from my mother's trust to establish the Grace Foundation for Independent Research. It is a grant specifically for scientists who, like me, were told to be realistic. Because they didn't have a golden child status to fund their dreams. This is the justice of the seed sower. I am not just destroying a toxic legacy, I am building a new one that values merit over manipulation. I looked at my old family digital albums recently. I saw all the photos where I was standing on the edge, the ghost in the background of Ashley's life, and then, I did the only logical thing left on my balance sheet. I hit delete. No noise, no drama, just peace. I wanted to share one last thing with those of you listening who have always felt like you were on the edge, to the ones who were called sensitive, difficult, or a burden while the golden child took the lion's share of the love. You are not a ghost in your own story. Your worth is not a variable that your family gets to calculate. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can show yourself is the cold, methodical decision to walk away from the people who require you to be invisible. You are the architect of your own value. If you have ever had to take back your own narrative from a family that tried to erase you, please share this video. You are not alone, and your truth deserves to be heard. Subscribe for more stories of justice.